To our YouTube channel, and if you have any questions, please type them into the chat. And I see your slide. Take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate that, Julie. So today we're going to be talking about Fabric data security with lakehouses and warehouses. Kind of wanted to talk about the differences between those and how you can set up security, because I think this is going to be important for DBAs in the future if your organization decides to use a lakehouse or a warehouse instead of a traditional database. Of course, the similar security rules still apply. So we need to kind of be aware of those. A little bit about me. My name is Ginger Grant. I am a Microsoft Data Platform MVP and a Microsoft Certified Trainer. And I also have some Fabric classes on LinkedIn. All right, so we're going to be talking about Workspace security, item security, RBAC security, and then OneLake data access rules. So in looking at Fabric security, you can see that there's a number of different layers for it. So you've got the workspace permissions, the item permissions, and underneath the items, that's when you get into the lakehouse, warehouse, and semantic model. And then, of course, you've got that's all on OneLake, so there's security for that as well. So we've got a number of different layers that we can, of course, use for this. So the first level of security, of course, is on the workspace, and that is going to be at the admin, member, or contributor or viewer level. Now, this is kind of misleading. If you were familiar with Power BI, you'll notice that this is the exact same ones that they have there. And the reason that it is somewhat misleading is because there's more security that is available other than these levels. So you don't even have to have access to the workspace to have access to the content within it. And this means that somebody can create a lakehouse or a warehouse, and all of that code to do that will be in the workspace. But the ability to access it, you don't have to have access to the code that uses to create it. So it's completely separate. The admin, they can do everything. Member can do everything that the admin can do except for create more admins and delete the workspace. A contributor can also add, edit, and delete items from a workspace. So once you give somebody access, they can do whatever they like, and viewers can just view. So everybody other than a viewer can actually do some damage to your individual elements, and there's no way of preventing them from doing that. There is no individual access elements on if you at the workspace level. If you have access to everything. So there's no, I can only see this, because if you have workspace access, you have access to everything. Now, item level security is for people who don't have access to a workspace. And you can limit the access to here. You can just look at this lakehouse, or here you can just look at this warehouse. So you grant it independently of that, and you use the security of the endpoint to make that happen. And the endpoint is the database that you are using in the back end that's going to allow you to be able to do that. So for your endpoint security, you've got object level security, of course, where you can do revoke, deny, and then, of course, get into data masking and do all of that with a different element. So let's take a look at that inside of my Fabric instance here. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Fabric. Now, just to keep it in mind for whatever reason, because I'm trying to do demos today, I noticed that I was having issues. So something that I hope you don't have in the future, but it happens when you do demos. If I want to access this in SQL Server and it's any other day than today, hey, it's 9/11, so I guess what do we expect, right? I can open up SQL Server Management Studio, which of course decided to do that on a different screen. And then I have the ability to enter my SQL endpoint to log in, as long as I'm using universal with FMLA, and then of course me. Now, as for what I need to connect to this, if I go to my gear and I get my analytics endpoint, go back to SQL Server and paste it. Then notice this is, I just cut and pasted this, we can see it's D23 here, and that's about the extent of it. And I'm going to go ahead and say connect. And this may or may not work. I have a default option if it doesn't work, but like I said, it works when I'm not doing demos on 9/11. Other than that, I don't have any problems with this, but there are other ways of doing this too. Now, this is inside of Fabric, my Acme Sales Data Lakehouse. And every lakehouse has a semantic model, which is it was just SQL Server telling me that it's not going to let me in today for whatever reason. Yeah, the timed out. No telling. I will say that next week is when I was sort of expecting to see problems, because Microsoft is prepping for their big data conference, and that's generally when things start happening that are bad. But it seems to be a little early in my case. So I've got this lakehouse, and this is the one that we were just looking at. And if I look at my SQL Analytics endpoint, this is what I wanted to put into SQL Server, and for whatever reason that didn't fly. So let's take a look at it inside of my endpoint, and we'll look at how we can do data security on it, doing something that I'm sure will be familiar to you DBAs, you know who you are, for granting access to various items. Can't get access to one, I'll get access to another. Really wanted to look at the one that I was in though. Let's see if I can access that one more time. In my Fabric workspace, and I want to go into my Acme Sales Data endpoint. And I'm logged in. Here we go. All right, I just have a number of different queries because honestly, I'm lazy and I do this sort of thing all the time. So I get different levels of, I just save my queries off as kind of a thing. Now, what's interesting about the SQL security that is available inside of an endpoint is it's very similar to SQL Server. Obviously, Microsoft modeled what they were doing off of SQL Server, but it's not exactly the same. Now, what that means is that there are a couple of functions that don't exist, and one of those is the ability to impersonate. So I cannot impersonate a user. So when I grant permissions, I have to log in as that person to be able to see it. So let's take a look at my worldwide importers database, obviously location, and then I've got my sales information here. Now what I can do, if we look at security, we see that we've got roles that are built in and any custom roles that we may have created. And I don't have any here. So I am going to actually deny some permissions to people based on what I've got in my data. So let's say that inside of my data here, I have a person that I do not want to have access to my sales table. They're not in sales. They don't need to have access to it. So I'm going to say that I want to do a new SQL query. And I want to deny the select access. So this is very similar to what you might see. I'll make this bigger. So I'm basically saying that I don't want, and it's not salesperson, it's sales, to Renee. So Renee, after I run this, she won't be able to see this table. So again, I'm doing object level security here. And yes, I should be doing this with enter security group, but hey, this is my test environment. And one thing to remember, unlike SQL Server, is this is stupid picky, and that was capitalized. So couldn't find it. But if I actually make sure that my capitalization is correct, I went ahead and then was able to deny select on this. So, you've got that object level security that you have in SQL Server inside of Fabric. Now, the other thing that I can do is I'm going to take a look at my location information. There's a lot of like PII data here. So let's say that what I want to do, I'm going to go ahead and select this. Just to select top 100 here for starters. And I want to mask some of my information. Now, I know how long many of you have been playing it with either Fabric or Synapse, because of course, Fabric was the successor in many ways to some of the technology in Synapse. But one of the things that Synapse made a really big distinction about was the difference between a data warehouse and a serverless pool. In Fabric, that distinction doesn't really exist. Anything you can do just about inside of a Fabric database, you can also then do inside of a lakehouse. Excuse me, you can do inside of a data warehouse. So data warehouses and lakehouses inside of Fabric have very, very similar elements in terms of functionality. To be honest, the big difference is between a lakehouse and a warehouse is your ability to do SQL updates on the data. You cannot do that with a lakehouse. You can on a warehouse. But in my mind, if you're talking about creating an environment that's primarily going to be used for reporting, in that particular scenario, there's really very little need to have people update using SQL Server. Now, you might disagree with me with that, but that is indeed the case that you can't, for reporting environment, generally speaking, it's not that necessary to update using that level. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, what do I want to do here is I want to do mask standard SQL masking. So if I'm going to do that, then I'm going to go ahead and create a mask on this. So what I'm going to want to do is I want to alter my table. And that's DBA location. And I want to add a mask with function. And I'm going to mask my city. I'm kind of getting some of the PII information out of this. So I want to do a partial mask. And I'm going to say that I want to start off with, I'm going to say partial. And I'm going to want to do 1. And then you'll see the first letter. 3 stars. And then 2. So I'm altering my location table and adding this masking to it. So go ahead and run that. So I can mask my data, adding people to this masked level. And so only people who have the appropriate level of security will then be able to do it. What did I do wrong there? Add. Oh, Add mast. Spell. Oh, I can tell what I did now. I did not close my quotes there. That's going to be a problem, and I'm missing a parenthesis as well. So now I've got my parentheses and my quotes all fixed here. I'm going to go ahead and run this. And oh, honestly, I am not thinking today. I'm altering the table, but I didn't add my alter column statement. There you go. I'm altering the table, I'm altering the column. So go ahead and run this. And now I can't spell. There we go. I finally figured out how to type. So, and one other thing to take a look at, if we look at the data here, we see that most of it is text, but the latest recorded population is not. That is a number. We can probably look at it easier. Just take a look at our table here. And we can see that, you know, city ID here is considered a number, as is the latest recorded population. So just for the fact that we're talking about this, I'm going to go back to my query, which was 7. And I want to also mask a numeric field. But if I'm going to mask a numeric field, I can't use text because it's a numeric field. That I want to alter table. And remember that I want to do the column as well. And add with function equals default. This is going to give me a 0 because I can't mask a numeric value with anything but that. Now, unfortunately, I'm an admin on this. And because I am an admin, I won't see this. So again, if I select this table, it looks just like it did last time. I will get nothing. I will see everything. No masking available. I need to be somebody else to make this work. No impersonation, which I really find annoying. I really wish they would fix, and I have no clue as to when and if that will happen. But hey, I can always dream, right? So I'm going to create a new and private window. We've gone into Fabric again. By the way, I'm too lazy to actually type anything, so anything I can pick off a list, of course I always do. And I'm going to log in as Renee and then take a look at this from her perspective. So Renee is not me. Renee has different abilities to see things. And I can go back to the browser if I didn't give her rights to this particular environment. You can see here, this is in the Fabric workspace. So we'll see what access she can't see. And I probably also really like to connect to her here. Yeah, I know, Todd. Isn't this annoying? That's one thing that just drives me up a wall, and there's not a thing I can do about it. Let me see if I can't grab this endpoint again and log in with somebody else. There's a number of different things that are not included inside of the database feature functionality of Fabric Lakehouses and warehouses. Some of them you might say, oh, that's fine, because not only is there no impersonate, you can't do cursors either. You also can't do temp tables, and varchar max is not supported. Some of the other differences, Chrome Incognito is a different user. Yes, I am doing a different being a different user, because that way it lets me log in. So that's how I'm logged in here, and that died on that one too. I don't know why. So here we can see in this new environment, I am logged in as Renee, and I have access to Fabric, so I don't know if this will work. I may have to like remove my access to be able to witness this. But yeah, that's exactly what I did here. Generally speaking, every day, but today I just log into Management Studio with a different user ID and do it that way. But you know, as you can see, I'm having issues. So I'll take a look at what I was looking at before, which was Acme sales data. Load today. So, like I said, just sitting here waiting for it. There we go. Jeez. Now, notice one thing that I did here, 2.RNA, is that I denied select on sales. So going back, Renee doesn't see sales because this is database security, not workspace security. So Renee, no sales for her. Now, if we look at location, I'm just going to do a new query. And I'm going to do just and run this. And of course, I have to learn how to do SQL today. Now notice I put the 3-character star, but I left 2 at the front, so you can see the first letter because I started at 1, not 0. And under latest recorded population, she just sees 0. And that is exactly what I told it that I wanted to do here. Now, just because we're talking about security, and I was giving you the different levels of security and showing you the differences with data. So this is me, not Renee. So if we look at Fabric and we look at our access, let's see what access I gave Renee. So she is a viewer. So she only has the ability to view data inside of my workspace. To be honest, I forgot what I gave her. So she can view things, and the things she can view include the database. And the security does apply. So one thing that is super annoying about this is, yes, to test this, you do have to follow the steps that I just showed you so that you can see whether or not it worked or not. But the SQL is the same as you may have used in the past. If you have ever done masking, which is, of course, has been available since SQL Server 2016, I believe. Somebody tell me if it was 2016 or 2018. So hopefully the version that you have that's familiar to you, you have played around with it. So same syntax. The only, as of course, wildly annoying thing is that you cannot impersonate. So any questions about that? DB security, is it more like on-prem or Azure? Azure being way more annoying. It's not as detailed. So there are things you can do in Azure security that you cannot do inside of a lakehouse or a warehouse. I can't think of something off the top of my head, but I know that it doesn't have the full feature set. So that is, but you can, you can do some pretty granular stuff to make it work. All right. Let's take a look at some of the other features that you can do inside of Fabric Security. Now, the other thing you can do is you can use RBAC. And this gets into a discussion of what a lakehouse is and how a lakehouse works. So what a lakehouse does is a lakehouse is accessing RK files in a Delta format in OneDrive. So you can choose to restrict access to the files on top of that. So by default, when you're doing RBAC security, everybody gets reader rights so that you can just read the files. You could, if you want to add additional levels of RBAC security on the files themselves, you need to remove that default reader property and then create a new role. And the new role can then be whatever you want it to be. And if you have subfolders, it will inherit them. So like, for example, let's say that you're importing data and you have a folder structure that it's year, month, and day. The security will inherit down to the previous level. Now, so that's what I mean when I say inherits subfolders. Now, when I'm talking about getting access to shortcuts that you can access, if you are granted access to a lakehouse, in that lakehouse, you may see a shortcut to for example, an Azure Data Lake share. Now, just because you can see that there is a shortcut does not mean that you can access the data in that Azure Data Lake if you don't have access to it. So there could be a shortcut that you could not see the data inside of it. Now, you could see the data once it was loaded to a lakehouse, but you couldn't see the raw files itself because it does make that security. But so you have quasi access to the shortcut. So you can't see the contents, but you can see the things that are loaded. So it's just kind of a weird kind of demarcation when you're doing RBAC roles. If you do want people to be able to see that, then you need to give them read access to any shortcuts that you have created. Now, with OneLake RBAC control, what you're going to need to do is request to read a folder inside of the lakehouse. So then you are going to figure out what kind of permissions that you want for that folder over and above what you might have on Workspace. And then you look at that different lakehouse permissions and seeing how those work with RBAC. And then, do even more default folder access, like maybe you can see some things, maybe you can see others. You can tie yourself up into knots with this because you can start stopping people the ability to see half the data if that's how it's split. A lot of times when you're doing partitioned information, if you can choose with RBAC to change the way that the permissions work with the different folders, and then people can only see half the data if you do that, even though they have access to the entire lakehouse or the entire workspace. So it's very granular, and it can be quite confusing in how you choose to set it up. So be thinking about that when you're looking at how you're going to combine this with what you might do with the database as well. I think you may find that you don't need as much RBAC security as you thought because you can handle a lot of it in the database itself. One of the things that I often do for configuring security for if I'm doing a Power BI connection, I will modify the default semantic model, which is created in the lakehouse, so that instead of getting access to all tables, the access is limited to views, and the views only has data that they have access to. So I could do that for reporting in a given semantic model, like the default one, so that they can't see things that I want to have specific security for. And I find this easier to do with RBAC because, to be quite honest, and then I have to deal with another level of administrator, and it can just get to be really tedious to make sure that I've got this all set up correctly. So for OneLake, the data access roles for that have to do with how you have chosen to set things up. Hopefully, your security roles match your files, because then that makes the most sense. So, for example, if I have a file folder that has the sales table and the salespeople table, then that security role means that I have access to those tables. But if I also have the product information in a different file folder, and I grant people access to that, then they can see the corresponding tables. But that can mean if I do not give people access to the different folders, that someone would see half of the data that is stored inside of a lakehouse. So you can restrict the data this way. Now, the reason that this is a lakehouse specific instance rather than a warehouse specific instance is because warehouse is not directly related to the files like lakehouses are. So if you're talking about RBAC security, you're really talking about the way that is going to implement a lakehouse, because a warehouse is using more of a SQL model because of the way you load the data into it. It's still using Parquet files, but they're not a one-to-one match like they are inside of a lakehouse. And that I understand that may be, somewhat confusing, but it has to do with the different organizational structure of the two different products. So your RBAC roles are going to directly impact your lakehouse, not your warehouse. But again, you can still set up any roles that you want to inside of the lakehouse or the warehouse to keep people from seeing or accessing different elements. In addition to what I showed you, you can do column level security as well. And you can do row level security if you want to write it. I know that very few people write row level security on a database, but hey, it's been doable since what, 2020? Somebody fact check me on that. Which version of SQL Server were you able to start with row level security? I think it was 2020, but I could be wrong. Could have been 2018. Keep me honest in chat. All right. 2016. Thank you, Amina. Yeah, so you've been able, but okay, have you ever written it? Has anybody ever written row level security on a SQL Server database? Yeah, I know you can, but I've not seen people do it outside of demos, which is interesting because, we do it in Power BI all the time, but do not see it in databases. Don't know why. All right, so OneLake Security's got that role-based access control, which allows you to access to folders, and that only applies when accessing the OneLake directly, and it implements Lakehouse security, and that turns off external sharing. So when it's turning off external sharing, what that means is you cannot then choose to share that data. Externally with just sharing the folder. Let's take a look at what we can do for RBAC. Of course, this is portal based. As well. And basically, as you may know, the OneDrive is actually Azure Data Lake Gen 2. It's just a specialized version of it. So it's not that unusual that you would be able to apply it because, again, you're just doing, you are just implementing the same kind of thing that you could do with an Azure Data Lake Gen 2. Jeez, this is ever slow. Camera. Ah, not going to be what I want to do it. Now this is giving me issues when I'm trying to do role-based security, so I'm going to have to pull this demo off. The reason why I'm getting these issues is because of my capacity, because I have a test capacity and not a Fabric capacity, which means I have limited access to the resources inside of Fabric. All of the resources for Fabric are going to be moved to FSQs, and in which case then you'll have that ability to access that information from Azure, which unfortunately I'm not going to be able to demo at this point. Sorry about that. I need to modify my tenant. So we talked about role-based workspace security, item security, and then OneLake data access roles in the environment. And I just wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions. That link QR code goes to a couple of classes that I have on LinkedIn. Should you be interested in taking some courses, especially if somebody else is paying for it, which is always my favorite. So the latest one I've got there is Advanced Fabric, where I go into some of the same things that we talked about today. So does anybody have any questions that I might be able to answer about security? Quiet group.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any new questions.
Great. I want to make sure that I honored your time because I know that people like myself have other places that we have to be after lunch. So what kinds of use case questions are good to walk through when you're trying to find a security strategy? How the data is going to be accessed and what tools they're going to be accessing it with. One thing that's important to remember with masking is it's available all the way down to the Power BI level, so that they will see data like that even if they happen to be in Power BI or any place they access the data in the Lakehouse or the warehouse. Do you start with the DB or the Lakehouse? When I'm working with data inside of Fabric, it's not in a database anymore. So I do it at the Lakehouse level. To be honest, I rarely use warehouses because I don't think that they're a really useful tool. So that's kind of an issue. I mean, in terms of different use cases, it's like, is there any PII data? PII data do try to limit access to at all times, making sure that it's very limited in scope. That would be one thing that I would mask nearly all the time. Also, there's kind of a philosophy of, do I want to put everything inside of one lake house and then grant people access to it, or whether or not I want to do smaller ones? And if I want to do smaller ones, then I don't need as much security because I'm limiting who has access to the whole thing. Whereas if I do a larger one, I'm going to implement more security because there's a lot of the same people with a lot of different roles will be used to access it. Great questions. Anything else? The smaller leveraging links to the source data. If the source data, generally speaking, that's an ETL process, because I'm doing this because I'm trying to bring a whole bunch of things together. So hopefully I'm able to access what I need, the source data, to provide people the access to the information. But yeah, if somebody doesn't want me to access it, then I won't be able to use it for reporting. So that's kind of the issue if you're looking at the source. Good question, Todd. Sorry, would you centralize the data? Yeah. So would you centralize the data and make small lake houses for viewing? I might. Like, for example, if I'm doing anything with HR data, absolutely. Because I want to keep that very limited and have a very small number of users being able to use it. I worked with a client recently, and all the salary information was only in one Lakehouse, and and like 7 people had access to it, and the other one, that column wasn't even there, so I could just make sure that there wasn't going to be an issue with people accessing, all the other information. If it's not that kind of confidential data, then I'm like, yeah, just put it all in one and just grant people access to it. But there's some things that are just so touchy that you just want to be super restrictive on. And I won't even, I'll create a lakehouse that won't even have the data in there. Also, if you have to share it with third parties, maybe you don't put any PII data in whatsoever, because that's not something that you're able to do. So you just kind of have to think about your data that you're looking at. All right, any other questions? All right, well, if that's it, I'll go ahead and give you 10 minutes back, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Julie, thank you very much for you and Paresh for inviting me, and I really enjoyed speaking to the user group.
Thank you very much, Ginger, for a wonderful lecture. Very interesting. Again, this is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
And thanks again.